have faith in
Check,
you.
check. Thank you, Councilmember Brown, for your compliment.
I got you. Not well placed.
Mr. Mayor, we're ready to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I will call the Riverside City Council meeting for Tuesday, January 21st, 2025 to order at 6:01 PM. And Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Here?
Mr. Denning?
Here.
Ms. Fry?
Here.
Mr. Joseph?
Yes.
Ms. Lomatch?
Yes.
Mr. Maxfield?
Present.
Mayor Williams?
Here. No excused members, or I'm sorry, no absent members to excuse, I should say. Mr. Manager, are there any additions or corrections to the agenda as presented?
So we did have a request from Councilmember Joseph about a resolution pertaining to America 250. And then I've been informed just prior to walking into this meeting that Ms. Llewellyn, ACE City Clerk, has actually prepared a resolution which you could act on this evening to that effect. So if you are willing to entertain that, you could make a motion to amend the agenda to add said resolution to the agenda and then discuss and vote at that time.
Okay. I'll make a motion to amend the agenda to include the resolution that was just mentioned. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All of those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, so the agenda, well, that was the motion to add the resolution. Do I need I probably need a second
No,
motion
that
to approve?
amended it.
That amends the agenda, and we have an approved
Yep.
agenda?
That was the addition, which makes the amendment, and that's what you just voted on.
So
You're
the
good.
agenda is approved.
Yes.
Good to go.
Moving right along, if you're able, please join us to rise and pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a few presentations, and the first one, I believe, is for our zoning code rewrite, the UDO, so I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Todd Kinski with Zone Co., who has an update on the Unified Development Ordinance process. This is a bit of a recap from what was presented to the Planning Commission, was that in December or November? In November, so a couple months ago prior to the holidays. But I will go ahead and get this teed up here. And then, Todd, if you don't mind, just a mic check real quick. If you can just, there you go. You might pull that up a little bit just so it catches you. Perfect. Take it away.
All right. Well, thank you for having me here this evening. My name's Todd Kinski. I work for a company called Zone Co., which you all have hired to help you rewrite your zoning ordinance and your Unified Development Ordinance. So what we've been charged with here at the beginning of the process is really an evaluation. You look at your code, identify, where are the shortcomings, what can be made better, how can we help you make your code be the best code it can be for your needs. And so, and then recommend a direction going forward, like what are we thinking and how are we going to tackle this? Rewriting a zoning code is a messy business. It's a lot of regulations, and there's not a lot of companies out there that specialize in it, and that's kind of what we do. And so we have a process, and we've actually already started a little bit of that with your staff. And so we are going to spend, well, actually, let's jump into it, and I'm almost telling you next steps. I'm sorry. Okay, so first impressions. So what we do first is look at your city and your code and trying to figure out what's going on here. So the first thing here is that you have a very strong commercial development pattern, which is really on your corridors. There's not really a true town center. How do you know when you've arrived here in Riverside, if not for the signs? Also, I should mention I did work for the city of Dayton for 6 years as their planning director, so I know what's going on the edge of the city. I'm also familiar with Wright Pat, and we just noticed that it doesn't seem like the city is really benefiting fully from this proximity to that use. A very strong saturation of auto-oriented uses. There are some uses that you would see in a lot of communities that are missing. And then also we just feel like you're just not really benefiting enough by the strong bike trail network that really exists in the community. So the zoning code is the main tool that you use to carry out or achieve the vision in your comprehensive plan. there's economic development tools that's really more of a city manager, kind of thing. But in terms of the development regulations, it's your zoning code. So what we do is we try to look at your comp plan and figure out, does your zoning code allow you to achieve that vision? So there are some very specific things within your comp plan that your code is lacking at in terms of being able to achieve that. Next slide. So just a few things we pulled directly out of your comp plan. So these aren't my words, these are exact words out of the document. Trying to have new growth and development, create a distinct town center. Current year zoning regulations won't allow you to do that. You want new development and redevelopment that will pay for itself in the long term. That one's a little fuzzier, but the whole notion there is that you want new development. And when I hear pay for it, I mean, it seems like you have a good return on investment. And typically that's usually happening at a higher density right now than lower density. And I'm not talking about houses, I'm just talking about concentration. Locations for new development, you want to be accessible and have all modes of travel be able to be integrated, and so that's really touching a little bit on that bike issue or the lack of connection to your trails. You want redevelopment that reinforces the character of Riverside. What does that mean? I would challenge you to open your code and figure that out. New residential projects will offer an array of housing typologies, varying price points, address multiple stages of life. Does everyone at every point have a place where they can live in your community? Is there enough variety of housing types available? And then there was a comment here about employment centers and the architectural character of those. And so anyway, this isn't everything in your comp plan, but these are just kind of some high points that we pulled out to say, hey, okay, your code can't help you do this as it's currently existing. And then just looking at your code itself, there are some limitations. I wouldn't call it overly user-friendly. There's lots of lists and standards, and it's not graphically very easy to read. We like the trend nowadays is to put all of the potential uses in one place, and you can quickly look at it and figure out, I want to build whatever that may be, and you can figure out quickly what districts instead of like combing through each section of the code. Things like that. There's not a ton of graphics that really help illustrate some of the complicated standards that zoning codes will present. There's not a lot of standards for things like the massing and the building design. And of course, those are things that are identified in your comp plan. We also need to have zoning lot requirements that reflect the existing development. I mean, Riverside is largely, not completely, largely built out. There's not a lot of available land. And zoning was adopted largely after everything was built. And so the interesting thing is that, and this is not a Riverside problem, we see a lot of jurisdictions where the zoning districts require a lot size bigger than the lots that are there. And that just causes a lot of variances. So if someone wants to go put an addition on their house and their lot has always been 45 feet wide, and it was there before zoning, why do we want to have a standard to say you have to have 60 feet, and now you have to go get a variance to do something really simple? So it's really about trying to make the code more user-friendly and more reflective of the existing development pattern. And then there's a lot of parking. But again, that's not a Riverside problem. As a country, we're over-parked is kind of a term that's used. I heard a thing the other day that talked about the number of cars and number of parking spaces that exist in America, and it blew your mind. So anyway, all right, we'll go on. The other thing is your zoning code is really a reflection of your community. So you should be able to not only achieve your plan, but also just, address the needs of your community. So one of the things we identified here there are some missing housing types. A lot of communities have problems with aging in place, so you get to the point where you no longer want to take care of that single-family home. Where do you go? Can you go somewhere in and this is one example, can you go somewhere in Riverside? Are there places for folks to live? Or do you have to leave the community when your housing needs change? The code is, it's corridor-based, so, we look at all of the commercial corridors. I mean, that's really just how the community, kind of developed. And we need to make sure that we can get standards in these commercial corridors that help you achieve the vision of the comp plan. And so that's one of the things we talked a lot about already. in terms of our approach. Again, mentioned the trailside zoning, and then the other thing is community input. You know, what does the community think about all this? So we've been working with NIA here to do survey. I think is it still live? Did we finally close it?
It's not on the website, but we have sent
Okay.
out, we have sent out QR codes with the solicitor or no soliciting stickers.
Yeah. So we're hearing back from your community and, you know, so we like to hear things at the beginning to get an idea where things are, and then we'll hear from them again later as we start moving forward through the process. Okay, so not to get all wonky on you, but there's different approaches you can take when you're doing a zoning code. And in the zoning world, there's these kind of 4 approaches. And unfortunately, it just really depends on who you are, where you are, the needs of your community. But there are some consultants that'll come at you and they basically only offer you one thing. And it's like, we do form-based codes, or we do use-based codes. And what we try to do, rather than coming at you with a solution and say, here's our solution, we try to work with you and figure out, well, what are your needs? And then craft a proposal that really meets the needs of the community. And so we end up in this, what we call hybrid mode. So, go ahead. So when you're doing a hybrid code, we're basically saying, one, you know, there's flexibility, adaptability. We're not giving you the solution we've already determined before we study your community. So in this case, the hybrid code allows you to really create what we call a character-based approach to your community. So what we've kind of where we are already is you have residential areas of your community that are probably always going to be exactly the same. The solutions there are going to be pretty simple. But where the needs are and where the potential for redevelopment, and really we're talking about a redevelopment right now, not greenfield development. We're talking about how do you redevelop the corridors, because that's really how Riverside is defined, you know, the main commercial corridors. And so what we're really going to do is we're going to focus in our attention and really improve those corridor design standards so that the next development that comes through the door, you get hopefully what you've laid out and not, you know, something that's unexpected. And so anyway, so we can, and the other thing is that, and rather than saying like, I have a single family home and we treat all single family homes the same, or I have, I don't know, a small retail and it's always treated all the same, the standards could be different depending on what district you're in. So if you're building something in a corridor, you know, in one corridor versus the other, the standards might be a little different. So it's really about character and design and less about the use. It's more about the where than the what. So when we do these hybrid codes, we can we look at the existing development patterns. We create the districts that really reflect those development patterns. So we're not giving you an answer. We're saying, okay, how is your community designed? How do you want to change that? And you basically write the code so you can get to the desired outcomes that you're trying to reach in each one of those districts. And then that is driven by the vision in your comp plan. So it's very tied together. So we're not out here just saying, oh, we think this would be great. How about tall buildings over here? So we're really using, you know, what you have already done in your comp plan process with community input to then, you know, to then do the code. So really, the zoning code is really an implementation effort that's coming out of your comp plan. So again, we're going to look at what works, what doesn't work, really focus on those outcomes, engage in citizens. And this is a little bit different, again, I believe that the level of engagement you do when you're writing a zoning code is a little different when you're doing a comp plan. Because we have already said, here's the vision. And we're just trying to write the tool to be able to enable you to, you know, carry that out. And so going forward, the idea is that we're proactive instead of reactive. And then the other thing is if you've ever opened your zoning code or unified your UDO, it doesn't look like this, right? So what we try to do is we try to put graphics in there so it's really easy for someone to open it up and figure out what, help them get through this puzzle that sometimes can be confusing to folks when they're trying to navigate a zoning code. The image on the right is really just, so it's like, the idea here is like, oh, I'm going to do, a wind energy turbine, or whatever that is. And then you figure out, oh, it's conditional use here and here, it's not allowed these other places. So the idea is you're getting all of that in one shot. The code on the left is a little more illustrative, so it's telling you, hey, here's where this district is located, here are all the dimensions, and then it tells you, kind of the purpose of that district. That's that's only one of those snapshots. There's more to it. But anyway, the idea is we're giving it, readers and users, the tools that they need to be able to understand some of the stuff that's really complicated. So the idea is that with zoning codes, a lot of times in the past, it was really about writing a set of regulations for professionals to be able to tell people what it means. And that trend has been flipped on its head, and now it's really about, let's write this in a user-friendly way so people can open it up and understand what it means. And that also then reduces the reliance on your staff to be able to have to answer every single call and say, well, let me tell you what that means. You should be able to read it, look at it, see a drawing, see some kind of illustration that helps you. Okay, so what we do, our process is pretty simple, is we do this diagnosis, which we feel like we've done, and now we go into this, what we call calibration process. And this is where this is the messy work, right? So we're going to be meeting with your staff on a regular basis. We're working through all of the regulations that exist in your code today, and then we're agreeing on how we're going to go forward. And so it's a lot of Excel files. It's a lot of us sending things to your staff and saying, here's what we think, what do you think, just back and forth, really the discussion, identifying, the other thing we've done with your staff is we sent them a 130 question survey, asking them all of these things about the code, trying to understand where their pain points are, what are the things that aren't working, what are the things that are working well. Because the things that are not broken, we don't want to rewrite those, right? We might want to reformat them, but we're gonna really let your staff help drive us on some of it, and then we're gonna obviously bring our expertise to the table on the rest of it. So anyway, so we're in this calibration phase, and this calibration phase will go on for probably 6 months. And then hopefully we've worked out probably 90 to 95% of the where we're going question. And then we start writing code. And then we're working again back and forth with your community, with your folks here. And then hopefully at the end of this journey, we bring forward a document that everyone is supportive of, and along the way we'll have some community meetings. And so ideally, I'm standing here in a year from now, or maybe a little less than a year from now, and we have a code, and there's nobody in the room that's angry, and we're all working on the same. I mean, I work in local government, I know this goes. But anyway, that's in a perfect world. Nobody's opposed, and everyone's, holding hands singing Kumbaya. But, so anyway, so that's kind of the process. I've worked in local government for 31 years. I understand how things can go awry. But as we're working through this, if we start to see problems, then we'll pull Josh in and say, hey, how do you want to tackle this? So we've been through some messy zoning code rewrites before, but you have a very supportive staff, a supportive community. You've done a comp plan; it's all fresh, so this should be pretty straightforward. But cross my fingers on that. I just described all that. I'm sorry, and so that's it. So I know I kind of moved through this pretty quickly. Maybe not quick enough. I know. Always on the clock in front of council. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to try to answer those, or whatever the protocol is, I can just go sit down.
I know I have at least one question for Todd, and if anybody else does, please feel free. Thanks for being here for starters, and I apologize. I should have come over and said hello earlier. I didn't put it all together, but you were in the City of Dayton Planning Department prior to going to work for Zone, is it
Yes.
Zone Co?
Zone Co, yes.
I started my career on the 6th floor of City Hall 20 years ago. Started the same month as Tony Kroger, which means Tony's really old, not me. But you spoke a little bit to working in communities that are largely built out, and in some cases, both in Dayton and in Riverside, neighborhoods that are 100 years old, literally 100 years old, platted in 1922, 1923. From my viewpoint, having a zoning code and having a codified ordinance that will allow for people to have practical use, even in situations, and you spoke to this a little bit, Todd, that maybe a minimum lot size that you apply uniformly across an entire geography might be larger than every single lot inside of that specified geography. And I think that what my view is from a lot of our citizens is there's a large level of frustration that they can't, that I can't do anything here. I can't put an addition on, I can't join this other lot to mine, I can't quite meet what you guys, and I'm not saying anybody specifically, but maybe arbitrarily decided you have to have a 60-foot lot width in a neighborhood where every lot width is 45 feet. Because it was built much, much earlier than maybe a more suburban zoning code would have been written. So could you just maybe give one or two quick examples of what is the approach that you guys bring to be able to meet some of these neighborhoods and setbacks and buildings where they are, and be more adaptable to maybe what citizens are looking to be able to do?
Yeah, so everything you said is true. The thing
Oh,
that-
everybody get that?
Yeah.
I'll make sure Tony Kroger
Katie
hears
just
about
put her
it.
head down
Fake
like this.
news.
But if you think about zoning, largely zoning was written for growth. And it was also written to like spread people out because being too close together was bad. That's kind of that was how it all started, that's how zoning came to be. Separate uses, and that's when everyone had a coal furnace and there was soot everywhere and all that, factories. So anyway, unfortunately, the zoning was then applied, in many cases, post-development, and the standards were always oftentimes larger than the existing zoning. So what we will do, this is the beauty of GIS, so we'll be able to go in and we'll look at lots, and we'll be working with your staff on this. And if we have an area where predominantly all the lots are 40 feet wide, then let's have a zoning district that has 40-foot wide lots, right? So you can't fix everything. There's always going to be, a lot that's smaller, but if you can.
That's what you have variances for.
If you can address the majority of them, you can do that. The other thing is, especially, I'm not saying this is true of Riverside, but in communities where there's been a lot of demolition, we can write special infill regulation standards, so that you can do that through different ways. Some communities, in fact, Dayton is a good example. They have contextual standards. So if you're putting in a lot, if you're building a house on an existing street where there's a vacant lot, instead of saying this is in district this and the setback is this, this, and this, what their code says is what's around you. So if all of the front yards are 12 feet, it's 12 feet or 20 feet, whatever the number is. They're all 2.5-story houses, or they all have porches, whatever. So that becomes the standard. So that's one approach. So we'll just have to figure out what works best for Riverside, and what works in parts of Riverside may not work in all of Riverside. So this is the beauty of the approach that we're taking. So in the older area where you have much smaller lots, we'll try to calibrate the new district so that it matches as close as possible.
Yeah, keeping streetscapes somewhat uniform.
That's right.
All right,
Yeah.
excellent. Well,
So
that was my
example.
question. Other questions? Any other planning nerds other than myself and Naya?
I do.
Brenda, yes.
All right, let's see if I can string some words together to convey what I'm thinking. So we're talking about trying to have a zoning code that's reflective of our comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plans are updated, what is it, every 5-10 years?
5 to 10 years.
Yeah. So I guess in an area in a community, you want to generate the ability to adapt and grow, right? But zoning codes traditionally have not allowed a whole lot of adaptability. So I guess the question I'm asking you is this effort really just focused on implementing the comprehensive plan as it sits right now? Or is there also going to be some efforts into incorporating adaptability layered with that?
Well, I'd say the short answer is yes.
Okay.
You wouldn't be redoing your zoning code if you loved it, right? So my guess is that Naya and others, users of the code, there's probably a lot of issues that are throughout the code. So part of it is really trying to make this is a document that folks can use, that it's easy to understand. That's part of it. It's also addressing any legal issues. Are there things that have happened, judicial decisions, at the federal or state level that aren't being reflected, in the way that you administer your code? The other thing we'll bring forward is best practices. What are we seeing in other communities? We're currently working in 30 communities right now around the country. And we are doing everything from Palm Beach, Florida, to this community on Long Island. But we're doing a lot in Ohio right here, especially in Ohio, but in the Midwest. So we understand a lot of the trends. So those things we'll address. But in the areas where you have very specific plans, visions that are in your comp plan, and you've identified an area where you're trying to, for example, part of the comp plan says talking about trying to create a town center. So we need to help you craft regulations that enable whatever your vision is for that to be able to happen. And so if what you envision, and I'm just like, I haven't read it in a few months now, but if it's like we want an area that's more walkable, more pedestrian oriented, taller buildings, mixed uses, whatever, maybe that's not what it says, but I'm just saying. But if you don't have zoning regulations that assure that is what gets built, and then let's say there's a prominent site that comes up in that corridor, and the first thing that gets built, and I know that this is a touch point, is a car wash, then everyone's gonna be upset, right?
Yeah.
But if you haven't removed car washes, for example, out of the permitted uses in that corridor, then a car wash can get built. Or if you haven't said, we want design standards that look like, whatever, mostly brick, pitch roofs, mixed use, I don't know, you can't get what you want if you don't have the right regulations. So in those areas where there's very specific plans or visions that are in your comp plan, those are the things that we need to suss out so that we get regulations that help you achieve that. But we also, it's a course correction on everything in the code, really. Everything in the code is up for review, unless your staff says, this works perfectly, don't touch it. Because we don't want to rewrite what works. So, sorry, long-winded answer. I started with yes, but there's a lot going to go on.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Just tag on to that. I think the things that we're hearing most from the residents and business owners and developers is they want a code that they can easily read, and I think that's why it was first on that list in one of the slides, is that it's user-friendly and accessible to our community and stakeholders. I think that's the key thing that we're trying to get out of this new code, is that anybody who goes to, riversideoh.gov and goes to our code can understand the regulations and what we're trying to communicate to them so that they feel welcome to build in Riverside, to live in Riverside, understand if they're putting up a fence, a shed, or even opening a new business, that it's easy for them to do work here and to develop here.
And it won't matter which section of the code they look at.
Right.
It won't say one thing in one part of the code
And there's consistency.
and something completely different in a different
Yes.
portion.
Correct. There's consistency.
Okay.
We take a different approach to organizing all the content. And I think what we see with communities is that as they work with their zoning code, they do little edits here and there, and then you start to get inconsistencies. And we try to pull all that apart and put all the right regulations in the right place. And we simplify the district. So a lot of communities do, they'll be like, oh, we had a problem with this one thing, so now we're going to amend that district and add these 3 regulations. But then they might be different than other regulations that exist somewhere else for another use. And so it's really about just cleaning it up and making it very easy for folks to read and understand and not be inconsistent, which can be a problem. And that's what happens when codes get amended over time. Because if you're adding something, you have to make sure you're not making it, a problem somewhere else. And that's sometimes hard. And then that's how you have communities end up with codes that are 200-300 pages long. And that's not uncommon. So we're going to try to make it thinner, too. We're going to be a little more brief.
I think I'm going to give a layman's summary of this. And this is something I feel like often is lost, is that we have to think about our customer, the consumer of the code. It's not the Pete Williams and the Nia Holtz of the world, unfortunately. it's the
Or fortunately.
it's the plumber Joes and like just the average everyday person. And like it's from what I'm getting is the objective, the overall encompassing objective is to make sure that it's legal and it goes with what our, like what we decided in our comprehensive plan. And third and foremost, it's easy to read and anybody can pick it up and be like, yes, I want to build a shed in my backyard. It can't be this far from my fence. It can't be this far from my primary structure. And I can like, this is the form I need to submit. So.
And here's what I can expect by going through these steps.
Right.
It won't, I think some folks think that that maybe we're playing hide the ball a little bit.
Yes.
Not we, but I think in the past, and, I think Nye would agree, that people feel like, well, I thought I was following these standards, and I thought that it was okay to do this because I read it here, and well, no, but yes, that is here, but the other section over here says that because you're also in this part of town, or this zoning code, this zoning section, that it might mean something else, or something in addition, and that's where Todd's point about amending and amending and amending, you can do nothing but get yourself into trouble, even with the best intentions.
So overall, anybody in the city would be able to pick this up and just read it, move forward. Sounds great. Appreciate all the hard work that y'all are putting into it.
Yeah. Anything else for Mr. Kinski? All right.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you,
for having
sir.
me.
We do have a discussion item on this later in the meeting in case there are other questions or other things that you'd like to talk about at that point in time. Todd, you're welcome to hang out for that if you want, or. Okay. Yeah, it's, we probably won't take too long to get there, so it's kind of up to you. If you have another commitment, feel free. So, let's go next to Ms. Baker, who has our fourth quarter financial report. I'll get that queued up here. And Kim, if you can pull a mic up, I want to make sure that I've got the right one unmuted. Can you say something?
Something.
All right, that's the one. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. We need a code on the air in here, I just want to say. We can work on that.
All right.
I just got that.
All right. It says we're doing fourth quarter. Through the end of fourth quarter is actually the end of '24, so I'm just going to talk about totals through the end of the year. The first slide here is just telling us what our initial expected revenues were for the year. So that's when we started 2024, what we thought we would get. And then what we actually received through the year would be that second number there. Some things to point out here. If you look at the fire, EMS, and police income tax fund, we were showing that we were going to receive basically 5.9 million. That was a pass-through fund, and we decided that we were no longer utilizing that. So we have decided since then to directly book income tax to the police and fire fund, along with the accompanying expenses. That way it didn't look like transfers in their funds. So some of these numbers are, at the bottom you can see our expected revenue is 31.6 million. That's a lot bit overstated. For 25, we're expecting 27 million. It doesn't include any type of transfer for income tax monies. That's really the big difference here. Another thing you might kind of see there is we started out with Right Point expecting the 5.865 and ended up with the 9.861. That has to do with the end of the year talks that we had about these buildings and how we took money from the general fund and then transferred it into the Right Point fund. So what we're seeing is what we originally talked about at the beginning of the year, but what happened through the end of the year. And I just kind of wanted to say a little bit about what those actual revenues were. We had 979 receipts throughout the year. The biggest dollar amounts were from CCA for our income tax and Montgomery County for property tax, and that makes sense based on what we're going to see here in a minute. Okay, next. All right, so these are the major fund revenues by source, really, not really type. So the source of revenues would be fees, grants, miscellaneous types of monies, taxes, and transfers. If you notice, our initial expected revenue did include large transfers. We ended the year without making any of those transfers into those funds, which was really nice. We did some small transfers for street, and we also did some for Wright Point. But as far as police and fire go, you'll see that their transfers were zero. That's because not only did we not move from the income tax holding fund, we also didn't move any money from the general fund. We made a concerted effort to pull from their reserves, and then we'll hold them at a steady operating balance moving forward. This here is just kind of showing a little bit more about how those transfers and taxes kind of affect things. So if we were to look at the fire fund and the police fund again, you can see that we expected, close to $3 million in the fire and 3.7 in police, and we didn't make any of those transfers. So some of our revenue monies, it's not true revenue if it's coming from one fund to another, right? And then this here is just kind of showing what our expected and our actual were for property tax. So this is actual expected, so through the year, we would have adjusted ever so slightly. Income tax, we did collect approximately $500,000 more than we originally thought. Property tax is pretty stable, so it comes in pretty consistently as the county tells us that it should.
And if I can jump in here real quick too, just as a point of clarification, since income tax is basically our largest individual revenue stream, you'll recall that the 2025 budget is 10.1 million in income tax, which kind of splits the difference here between what we budgeted last year and what we actually collected. So even going forward, we're being very intentional about what we're assuming in terms of this year's expected revenue. Sorry, Kim.
Nope, that's good. All right, so this is talking about our initial appropriations for the year, so what we would have approved at the end of '23 to spend from each fund, and then how much we actually spent. Throughout the year, I'm sure you all know that each quarter we've come to you and asked for additional monies to be spent, so that's why we see out to the right, our differences are, some of them are a little bit substantial and some of them are not. So you'll see in Capital Infrastructure Fund, we did address that deficiency in the fourth quarter. That had to do with some OPWC grants that are pass-throughs. So when they do their work, we record the revenue and the expense. We didn't know about those until later in the year. So that's why we wouldn't have originally budgeted for them in that 4702 fund. As far as the expenses go, I just wanted to give you a little bit on that too. So in 2024, we wrote 2,236 payable checks. We also cut 2,702 employee checks. And our largest AP checks were to ESG for work on this building, and then Huber Heights for dispatch fees, and then our insurance that we pay for all of our properties to public entity pools. This particular slide is kind of showing us where we started with our initial appropriations. So the first column is just telling us what you guys approved at the end of '23 for us to spend. The second one is telling us total. So total would include anything that we still had in budget from prior year, so '23, along with our initial appropriations for '24, along with all those supplementals that you approved throughout the year. And then the 2024 expense is still the total expense related to those total appropriations. But you can see that we went from an initial appropriation of 26 million to, 38.9. I will say that there was about $1 million of that was prior year budget. This is kind of showing us what our major fund expenditures are by category. So when you guys appropriate, you are allowing us to appropriate based on personnel versus other in our funds. We also do that by department. But here you can kind of see the blue line is the budgeted amount. The orange line is the actual expense. So the first general area is for general fund, and we have other versus personnel. In the general fund, it absorbs a lot of things that other funds don't, so that's where we can spend our general monies, right? But if we look at fire and police, you can kind of see what we had talked about during the budgeting season, where a large proportion of their costs actually go to their people. So personnel is going to be wages and any other fringes and overhead related to having people on staff.
And just a point of clarification here too, the reason this blue bar is much higher than the orange bar for the general fund is because we did not make transfers.
Yes, sir.
And in the Right Point Fund, the reason the blue bar is higher is because council appropriated money to do the improvements at Right Point, but we have not yet spent
Oh,
all of
yes.
that money.
I did mean to say that. So with the Right Point monies that we talked about at the end of the year, the $3.5 million, we have only spent approximately $860,000 out of the Right Point Fund. We were able to use some ARPA funds to kind of true up some difference there, and then we do still have it appropriated to spend this year against that contract, though. And then this is our personnel services kind of broken down by our major funds here. So you can see what we initially thought people would cost versus what they actually did cost. There's not a huge difference. I think that we used the ClearGov product in 2023 at the end, and it kind of helped us kind of hone in on the total cost of our people. So it did a pretty good job based on what I can tell. And then the last thing has to do with cash. So when we were talking about budget this year, we were really conservative on where our fund balances were going to end. At the beginning of 2024, our total fund balance was 15.25 million, and the general fund had 6 million of that. Of that 6 million, of the 15.2, we had 2.8 million that was committed. So we would take that 2023 outstanding commitments. That comes directly off our fund balance because we're required to pay those. We have those already appropriated to people. They're already encumbered in purchase orders. That's how we know that we owe it out. So the available cash balance at the beginning of 2024 was $12,482,314 right there. At the end of 2024, our total funds are actually landing a little bit higher, and our general fund also is. However, you'll notice that our outstanding commitments are larger. We did, at the end of the year, again, make a concentrated effort to kind of get caught up on some fixed assets that we were behind on purchasing, as well as we had some other big purchases like putting money into this asset that we're sitting in. And so the actual available beginning cash balance in 2025 is that 10.452. I did kind of want to note that our digital budget book kind of had the general fund sitting at 4.19 million at the end of 2024, and you'll see that we actually landed on 6.3. So that's a significant difference from what our original planning for 2025 had in it.
And that's in large part because we had unexpected one-time revenue come in from the treasurer's office, or excuse me, that was for Right Point.
Yeah, we did at the end of the year, the treasurer's office came in and delivered us $500,000. That was for real estate taxes that we paid on Right Point, that they went back and refunded us over 6 years. And that was large part due to community development kind of working on getting us those abatements, really.
But if memory serves, we had a little bit more in art money that we were able to use for Right Point too, which saved some expense up front. out of the general
Yes,
fund.
so the ARPA fund had to be completely committed by the end of 2024. We had reserved some monies for some infrastructure projects. When I came on, we were historically going over project costs, so we kind of built in some buffers using the ARPA monies so that we could ensure that the infrastructure projects would keep moving. So those are the large street projects. With the new service director on board, I think that we have a better handle on where we're at with some of those projects, and then also with your guys' help with the 2025 budget, we were able to release some of those so that we could use some of that money on helping with the Right Point projects.
Point being, of course, that we basically have already entered this fiscal year in a stronger position in the general fund than we expected. We're going to continue to be conservative with the budgeting going forward, but we have a little bit more legroom as we enter this year than we thought. So fingers crossed that, as long as inflation kind of stays stable and all of our other costs stay about where we think they're going to be for the year, we should end the year with more money than we expected to, which I think is good news. So, any questions? Okay. I'll go get back to my agenda here. Yep, that wraps the presentation.
All right,
So we're in-
thank you, Ms. Baker. We have a motion to approve the minutes from January 9th, 2025. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Maxfield. So we have a motion from Ms. Lomatch, a second from Mr. Maxfield. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Minutes are approved. If there's any citizens joining us tonight and wish to fill out a form to speak on any agenda or non-agenda items, they're located in the back of this room. They can be turned into our clerk up on the dais. And Madam Clerk, have there been any forms for public comment turned in on agenda items thus far tonight?
There have not
Okay, yet.
yet.
Okay. Then we move on to new business, of which we have 4 resolutions. The first resolution, Resolution 25-R-3007. Mr. Manager, could you please give us a short synopsis on this?
This is an annual housekeeping resolution for Julian and group to prepare our GAAP statements, annual financial statements. Ms. Baker is available if you have any other questions.
Move to approve.
Second. We have a motion from Mr. Denning and a second from Mr. Maxfield to approve Resolution 25-R-3007. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Mr. Manager, 3008 seems, is this an annual thing we do as well in January?
Yeah, the county updates its hazard mitigation plan, I believe, every 5 years. So this is required, council adoption is required in order for us to participate in any FEMA funding that may become available due to a natural or other hazard.
Move to approve.
Second. We have a motion from Mr. Maxfield and a second from Mr. Brown. All those in favor of Resolution 25-R-3008 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. And the next resolution, Mr. Manager, Woodman Harshman.
Correct. This is Resolution 3009 is a project management agreement with the Montgomery County Transportation Improvement District. So this agreement basically encompasses the congressionally directed funds that Congressman Turner's office sent our way, the $1.5 million to do design work for the Woodman corridor up here near the base. The TID will serve as our project manager for that agreement and basically get us through as much of the design phase as possible.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Denning and a second from Mr. Joseph to approve Resolution 25-R-3009. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. And 3010, Mr. Manager, our final resolution currently?
Second to last.
Second to
We did
last,
add
yeah.
one.
Second to last.
But this is housekeeping. We've been doing quarterly, then and now, resolutions for council. We only had one that emerged at the end of last year. Engine 5 had several difficulties that I think Chief Miller's alluded to in prior meetings, but we did have an expense related to, I believe, a turbo for that engine that we do need council approval for. We had to get the turbo replaced.
Move to approve.
Move to, second.
We have a motion from Mr. Joseph and a second from Mr. Denning. All those in favor of Resolution 25-R-3010 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. And the added resolution, I guess we're going to call it 3011.
Correct.
I could take it. All right, so America, our country, is having its semi-quincentennial birthday next year, so 250 years. Back in 2016, the United States Congress passed H.R. 4875, which was put into law in July 22nd of 2016. Essentially, it appropriated funds from the federal government to be dispersed to states to do things like educational programs, promote state and local partnerships, and public engagement. So in total, there's $34.8 million granted to different states across the country, which Ohio has had several different funding cycles. Right now, it's in the third and I think final funding cycle, which we have to accept it or get involved with America 250 by January 31st, which is why it's last minute notice. And we can apply for grants up to $5,000. So they're giving 55 communities across the state up to $5,000 to promote some type of civic engagement, education around America's 250th birthday. So America 250 Ohio is the one is sponsoring this from the state chapter, and there's some work that would go alongside this. We'd have to appoint 1 or 2 people from our city as liaisons. We need to partner with a local civic organization, nonprofit charity, to come up with an event to do, or some type of engagement for our community. It's something that I've seen like Clark County, the city of Oakwood, city of Troy, Columbus, Yellow Springs, Sherman Township, Hamilton County, they all are members of this organization. And it doesn't commit us to appropriating any city dollars. It allows us the opportunity to receive $5,000 from this organization. And next month, later on, between now and 2026, we can discuss what we would want to do as a city to celebrate the semi-quincentennial birthday of America. Yeah, that's all I have.
Okay. And again, the reason that we're trying to get it in tonight is because it would be due, an application would be due to the organization by the 31st of this month, and the motion that we would have would be essentially us passing the resolution and then allowing for the city manager, the city law director to be a signatory on that grant application to America 250 or the Ohio chapter of America 250. That's correct. But it doesn't cost us any money, and we could potentially be included and do something for the community that summer, next summer. Get it all?
Would the application include a proposal?
So steps to become an AM 250 Ohio community. Designate individuals as primary contact for the application, which I sent that out to them to get the resolution to apply to the AM 250, and then upon the application, communities are supposed to adopt a resolution, which we're doing tonight. And then within 30 days of the passing of the resolution, begin to form your committee and designate the names and send the names of 1 to 2 individuals who will be the appropriate governmental office of the local cultural, civic, or corporate partner who will serve as the AM 250 community liaison. So we have to pick people who want to lead this. And then begin to form the committee, and then the AM 250 Ohio staff liaison will work with us to provide information and resources to help us have a successful event next summer.
So they wouldn't be deciding on which communities get the funding based on the project proposals?
Yeah, it's not, they are gonna, the organization helps the communities, decide what they're gonna do.
Okay.
Like a picnic, fireworks, something along those lines.
Okay.
And Deputy Mayor, just if I may add in just from reviewing the proposed legislation language from the organization, it's simply a ceremonial statement that council would like to be included in that pool. So there is no specific proposal or anything like that included in the initial legislation. That's simply, I think, as Councilmember Joseph indicated, opens the door to allow the city to
It
participate.
just gets us in line to collect a check if it's possible.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay, and do we have the language of the motion? Or do we need?
Oh, yeah, I have it.
Actually, Mr. Mayor, because of the diligent efforts of our city clerk, we actually have a drafted resolution that could be acted on with no need for a motion or signatory delegation this evening. It could actually be, the title of the resolution is a resolution of the City of Riverside, Ohio, supporting the Ohio Commission for the United States Semi-Quincentennial America 250 OH, and it aligns with exactly what Councilmember Joseph indicated. That could be moved as is and actually adopted or considered by council this evening.
Move to
Okay.
approve.
Second?
We have a motion from Mr. Joseph and a second from the Deputy Mayor. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Thank you to the clerk and to the law director for their work on this. We will move to public comment on non-agenda items. I will ask the clerk how many slips have been turned in for non-agenda item comments tonight.
I have not received any
Okay,
slips.
well, it was a question worth asking.
I know.
We'll move on to discussion items. Mr. Manager, you're up.
With your leave, Mr. Mayor, I'll entertain item C, which is UDO revisions first, since our
Yes.
guest is still with us. Really, the only topic I'd like to cover with respect for discussion this evening is just based on the presentation that we heard tonight, it encapsulates the overall approach to a code rewrite. I believe that ZoneCo has prepared a short memorandum or a deliverable that kind of encapsulates what you heard tonight about taking more of a hybrid approach to a code rewrite that contemplates more tailored zones, if you will, and that aligns with our land use plan. My approach would be to bring you a resolution that sort of blesses that and says, yes, we would like to proceed with this form or this kind of a.
This
of a-
approach.
Thank you, of a zoning code as opposed to an entirely form-based code or an entirely traditional code that basically adopts that as our strategy and approach going forward. But I wanted to be sure you had some space to talk about that, and then if there are other questions, Mr. Kinski can help you answer. We're available to have that discussion here this evening. If there's no further discussion, then we'll work on a resolution effectively encapsulating that, and I'll bring it to you at the next meeting.
Okay.
My only thing would be the two zoning experts here at the table, 'cause this is.
The one zoning expert and then the mayor.
Oh, you.
No, I'm pointing
Oh.
at you, Naya.
Two zoning experts in the mayor.
Yes, thank you. Ah, much better.
Is this like golden stamp of approval, like this is your, like, this is what you all?
Yes, so we have talked with the planning commission, we've met with the steering committee already, and they have both seen this approach with this hybrid. They have also talked and discussed it more at the planning and zoning conference that was, or workshop that was held. They've looked at a few other models, and a few of them actually reached out and had other considerations. So they're already digging into it and are excited about this approach.
And I think the hybrid gives us long-term more flexibility
And
in
adaptability.
code, in our future code, any changes we might make too.
Yeah, I would just echo what Zach said earlier tonight, that the code needs to be written for folks who are not, who haven't maybe been in depth with the language and some of the vernacular and the terms that they might be viewing or trying to make heads or tails of, but also don't feel intimidated to make improvements to their own house or maybe invest in our community because they look at our zoning code and think, well, it's way too rigid, or they're so completely hooked on this, on one land use plan or one zoning district for a certain use, that it turns people away. And whether that's intentional or unintentional, if it happens, it's something that it's incumbent upon the seven of us to make sure that we're giving our staff the tools they need to attract investment and make our citizens the type that want to figure out how they can invest in their own property. Something as simple as a fence, something as complicated as an addition, and not feel like the city's there to tell them no. The city's there to say, let's figure out how we can get there from here. And that's what the hybrid approach, as opposed to strictly form-based or strictly Euclidean code, would not provide for us. So onward and upward.
Yeah, I was just making sure that, like, here's the thing. We talk about a lot of different topics throughout our, like, meetings. And when it comes to these types of, like, really in-depth, specific, technically inclined items, I rely on the counsel of people who I know have spent their career or have went to significant amount of schooling to give us informed guidance. That's all I was asking. Golden
Yeah.
stamp of approval, make sure that, like, the people who we trust with these items are
Yeah.
on board.
In our steering committee, we've made up of people who, individuals who have on the BZA, on the planning commission, residents. We have a young student or Stebbins grad who is on the steering committee, a business owner. So I'm glad that we have different mindsets and perspectives on the steering committee to give us feedback. So.
All right. I think you got what you need, Mr. Manager?
I think so. We'll go ahead and I'll get you the deliverables so that you can look at those beforehand, and we'll prep a resolution, and I'll bring that forward to the next meeting.
All right, and thank you, Mr. Kinski, for all your time this evening. We certainly appreciate that.
Moving on, so we'll move over to proposed revisions to the city council handbook. So I will pull that up on the screen here. So I did, council should have received an email with this document as well that's redlined. I will just briefly summarize. There are not a ton of substantive changes to this document. Most of the changes that were made were reflective of charter amendments that were passed by the voters, so a lot of it was housekeeping. There was also a change made with respect to the agenda section that reflects decisions that council made about moving more toward Monday meetings, for example. The area of largest change, I would say, has to do with a little section here inside the agenda setting area that just talks about basically different ways that council can bring forward topics to be discussed at a meeting. Certainly, it's your prerogative at any meeting to bring forward an item for discussion, but you may think of something after a meeting, something may come up. The intent of this section is just to clarify that for the sake of keeping each other aware and informed, my recommendation would be that if you have an item that you want to talk about with your counterparts at a future meeting, if you email that subject to myself, the law director, the clerk, and your counterparts, just to build awareness, I can make sure then to list it on an agenda, just so that folks know that it's out there. My only other request with that is if you want me to prep anything, please let me know, because I don't want to be caught unawares, or if you have an expectation that I bring you something to help facilitate a discussion, I want to be able to give that to you so that that time is fruitful. So if you do need something, just give me a heads up as well in that email. And then, of course, to avoid violating any sunshine laws, send that email out, but that's also not an invitation to start a conversation by email. Just be very diligent about whether or not you reply to an email with respect to that. But at that point, that's the largest change to the handbook that I had and wanted to get in front of you. I want to be sure you have space to have a conversation about the handbook or any other changes that you feel are necessary. So I'll turn it over to all of you. If there's anything else that you'd like to talk about, other than that, I would look for, I can bring this forward following this meeting at the next meeting with a resolution to adopt a revised handbook.
My only thing would be, mayor and the deputy mayor have historically always held agenda-setting meetings, and kind of forward-thinking to, like, this is something I feel like with councils in the future is going to have to be reiterated. Like, if you if you hit reply all to a email with all 7 of us on there, you very much run the chance of violating Ohio Sunshine Law every single time you do that, because something could be like construed as being deliberative. So with respect to agenda setting, if it's an email to the council member sending it, the deputy mayor and the mayor, who are the ones that set the agenda, would we find that to be more appropriate instead of emailing all 7 of us? Because the 3, that doesn't violate, that's not an open meeting. It's still a public record, but it would not be considered an open meeting because that's not a quorum.
What does the law director say?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there are really 2 approaches. So the recommendation from the city manager to email city manager, law director, clerk, and all of council as an informational item, as Councilmember Joseph alluded to, that's perfectly fine. That's spreading information. There's no deliberations in process. If council believes that may persuade or encourage a reply all, that's where the deliberative aspect comes into question and could be construed or interpreted as deliberations via email in violation of Open Meetings Act. In terms of emailing potential agenda items to the mayor, deputy mayor, city manager, clerk, and law director, there would be no risk of inviting a reply all that would at all trigger the open meetings question. So really, either approach is legally permissible. It's the comfort level of council, I think, as what the consensus is as to how much do you want to rely on everybody not to resist replying all to a email that includes all of council versus, the benefit to that is that all of council then is aware that the topic is sort of on the table and is brought up by one of your colleagues. The benefit to limiting it to the agenda review folks is that there is no possibility of any kind of open meetings triggering. So really, it's a policy question.
I would like to point out that, given that it would be put on the agenda, all of council would become aware when they receive the agenda packet.
I propose a hypothetical. Next year, we could potentially have up to 4 new people on this council, potentially. And one person sends out an email to all 7 of us saying, I want to talk about this. And one of those 4 potential new people, very true possibility, one of them replies all. Then the next new person replies to that. Now we've just created a big old mess.
It really depends on what they're talking about. If they're talking about the subject, or if they're just saying, thanks for the information,
Well,
right?
yeah, but
It
it's-
depends on whether it becomes deliberation or not.
Still, I think good policy covers your bases to prevent things from happening that could end the city up in some legal jeopardy.
I don't really have a strong preference one way or the other, but I do take your concern. And if we really wanted to have that email that went out to the full council, the change to the council handbook could state very strongly that, don't, when you receive this email, don't reply all. And it could be handled that way.
Yeah, I mean, so basically to read that back, one way of handling this, and I can adjust this language accordingly, but if we wrote it to say, if you have a discussion item, email me, we can run it through agenda review, assuming it makes it on the agenda, then it would, of course, go out as published. If we're some time away from that, and there's appetite to discuss it, I can always send an email to council that says, hey, just take it under advisement, this will be on upcoming agenda. Don't start a conversation behind the scenes. We're going to talk about it on this date.
I like that.
And leave it like that?
Yep.
Okay.
And if I may just add as well, just for comfort level, if I'm included on an email of that nature, it's 99.9% of the time going to be attorney-client privilege, so it will be between you as the client and me as your law director as well. So that will not be necessarily a public record, and I can then advise accordingly in terms of how to best communicate back and forth about the topic at hand.
Okay. So I will make those language adjustments, and I'll send a revised handbook out to all of you, and we'll put a resolution on the next meeting to accept the handbook with revisions. But as always, if those revisions go out and there are questions, just give me a shout. Go ahead. You looked like you had a question, sorry.
Yeah, I have comments on it. I
Oh,
wasn't sure if
yeah.
you were closing the topic.
Oh, all right. If there's other stuff, let's dive in. I thought we were done, sorry.
So I'm looking at page 2, and on the first reading, we are, based on the charter amendment, we are no longer posting in the newspaper. But the posting in the administrative building, I think, still has value to the community. So I think that we should consider continuing to do that.
We do.
I didn't hear what you said, posting in the what?
Administration building.
Front desk gets a copy of it.
So in here, it's being struck.
We can reinstate that language. I mean, it's just a
Okay.
practice we'll continue doing. So that's not a problem. We can put that back in.
Okay. Another item?
Remember when we used to make them run off to every school?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Sorry. Next item.
We're taking out the definition of work session,
Because we no longer have work sessions.
but we have references still in the document.
Fair enough. We'll find those and eliminate them.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm reading this meeting format as we no longer have time or space for general announcements. Is that correct, a correct reading?
You said general announcements, sorry.
Like, the school is having their, or, yeah, or, when I announce the blood drives, those types of announcements, I'm not
Fall under 14.
You would. that would-
understanding how that would play out.
You could do it, we could do it in 13 or 14. But 14, the council member discussion was, what was the terminology before? Council member comments?
Councilmember
Announcements
comments.
or comments.
It's
So
substantively the same
Yes, and it's
section.
a discussion for whatever you want to bring up.
Yeah, so
Okay.
14 is where I would recommend that you could bring up blood drive or other community-related announcements.
So my interpretation of what you're telling me is that we would, under council member discussion, we would have things that we would get placed on the agenda for discussion, such as the 250 resolution. But for announcements, we wouldn't necessarily place that on the agenda. We would just bring it up at that time.
I would rephrase a little
I think
bit.
I think you
Yeah, I would-
split those.
Yeah, I would, to me, there's no change in council member discussion from the council member comment.
Yeah.
It's the same sort of section, so there's no need to get on the agenda beforehand. I would treat council member discussion like the way you've been doing council member comments.
Okay, so the part, of getting it put on the agenda, that would fall under 13.
13,
Yeah,
correct.
discussion.
Yes.
And 14 would be where we would make the announcements.
Yep. We didn't want to say council member announcements because something more substantive may come up. It may not just be an announcement. And then similar, the reason why the terminology also, we felt discussion might be a better word than comment is because, again, something more substantive may come up. And so it felt like just a way to create a spot in the agenda where council members have their own time to bring up really whatever is on your mind that, that's relevant, whether that's an announcement, a comment, or something else that's more substantive.
Thank you.
More deliberative than like just going around the horn and saying something.
Right.
Deliberative is a great word.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I would agree. Okay, well, are we good to move to the next, are we on department updates? Or
Yep,
department reports,
so,
sorry.
Yeah, just to recap then, we will make those adjustments to the document. I will get that out and we'll have that on next meeting's agenda. For department reports, really, I wanted to kind of pick your all's brain a little bit about this. So part of what I've tried to do with respect to the department heads and the staff here, most folks have evening commitments that are work-related of some kind. If you're public safety, you're in and out for calls, those or natural disasters, that kind of stuff. I know, Ms. Moore's got Parks and Rec Committee, Ms. Holt has BZA and Planning Commission. Kim, every time the budget season rolls around, those are 12-hour days pretty easily. And I only say this because, and of course, Katie and Jim and I are in and out at several different meetings. All that is to say, what I've been trying to do is sort of balance people's requirements to come to meetings, especially for other boards and commissions, with requirements to show up for council. The general guideline I've given folks to date has been, if you have an agenda item, something that's going to be voted on, I need you to be here. Last year, we sort of alternated. Every other month, we had a series of departments come through. I mostly wanted to take your temperature on whether or not that you found that effective, whether you found it helpful. If I was going to make a suggestion, part of me says it may be better to move more to a quarterly update schedule with the departments rather than try to push every other month. So for example, I would do, in the first quarter, I would have community development, finance, and admin stuff, and in the second quarter, we would do public safety, public service. And then third quarter, go back and forth. But I wanted to be sure that that resonated with you, and that if there are specific things that you want to hear from departments during those updates, and of course, we don't have to hash all that out today, but to open the door to that. So please let me know what those are, or if other questions come up, I can make sure that they're giving you updates that are helpful As we move forward with budget and strategic planning, and you think a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line, I would envision those updates get much more focused on where are we with strategic goals and KPIs and indicators. Again, we're still laying foundations for a lot of that, but that would give us a format and a timing, a cadence, if you will, for how to hold those conversations in a way that's substantive but also helpful.
Yeah, I think we get the weekly updates,
Mhm.
and I think that's been very helpful, so I don't think it's a need to require them here every other meeting, because we get lots of information from those updates weekly. That's just my personal opinion.
I think a quarterly cadence would be very beneficial.
I certainly agree, and I think, I don't know if everybody here everybody was here when Josh got hired, right? Or everybody except for maybe Andy? The weekly updates are incredibly informative, and I think it just gives me a large level of ease on a lot of the things that we might hear from one of the chiefs or a department head if they were at a meeting maybe every other week or something like that, because all you have to do is reference back to any one of those reports because there's an enormous amount of detail that goes into them. So it's great, and I agree with Jesse that those really serve as a lot of the substance of an update already gets delivered to us on a Friday.
Now, if there's something that they feel is pertinent
Oh,
to
yeah.
deliver to us or
Oh,
announce to
certainly.
us, I think that's great, but if
Or,
not.
or if somebody is going to, want to make a presentation to one of the departments that we require them to be here.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what Josh alluded to.
And I'm sure that would be standard, but
Mhm.
I do agree that the weekly reports have given me way more information than I ever got when we were getting reports at every meeting from every staff member. I get a lot more detail, and I think it's great.
I think stretching them out more, like you said, gives an opportunity to like have a higher level view, which, what we get in the weekly reports is, these are like detail of what's happening, and then complement that with a higher level view.
More
is
substantive data.
Yeah.
The only thing I think that is important is that we make sure that the community is getting that information somehow also, besides us getting the weekly reports that
Like a
somehow-
blotter?
Huh?
Like a blotter?
Something I mean, it doesn't even have to be as much information as we get, but in general, they need to know that the stuff's going on, because right now, they can watch the video and see the reports, and yeah, a lot of the stuff that we get is redundant from what we got in the report the week before, but I think the public needs to know that their people are, what our folks are doing.
I think they've been doing a good job lately of putting some of that data out there on
I
social media.
haven't been watching,
things
but
like that.
I'm just saying.
I've seen that come
I just want to
across.
make sure that the public gets the same information or a portion of the same information that we're getting.
We've been putting them in the packets.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
for quite a while, but the other thing we can look at doing, though, I know some places will put they'll create like a document folder or whatever, or some repository, and Katie and I can knock our heads together on maybe a way to separate some of that. But the other thing too, honestly, that I wanted to test with you, sort of related to this topic, is that, that I have given some thought to almost moving toward more of a quarterly or maybe a semi-annually sort of community update just for myself, that I could record and stream, do one during the middle of the day, do one at night, same kind of topic, but in some
The
respects.
state of the
keep it-
city.
Yeah, yeah, in a miniature kind of condensed way, because candidly, this is, and we'll talk about more about this in probably February, but candidly, this is when we've had budget committee meetings, which those are only 3 people, deep. That's generally the spirit and the tone of those meetings, is I kind of give a little mini budget update, a little bit of an update about development projects, and then we play kind of 20 questions. What's going on with this? What's going on with that? Keep them to about 40 minutes to an hour and sort of move on. So I would like to be more proactive myself about doing that this year on a quarterly basis too, which fits right in with the rest of this timing. So I'll make the effort to try to more proactively on that. And it will cover many of the things we talk about in weekend updates as well, so.
Mike, to your point, the state of the city, that's what Dayton does. Mayor Mims, before Mayor Whaley, would give a state of the city, and it's a big pomp and circumstance like event.
Well, I don't see I want it to be big pomp and circumstance, but I do want to get information out to folks.
Well, I'd say it this way, is then if, I'd be curious to see if we do it like on just like a live stream on YouTube or a post on Facebook, like what's our analytics there? What's the engagement? How many people did we reach, right? Because it's just randomly out of the blue, here comes a semi-annual update from the city. Or would your impact be more broad reaching if you said like, this day, a month, 2 months out, we're gonna do the State of the City address. It'll be here at City Hall, it'll be streamed on YouTube. The fire
yeah.
chief, all the department heads will be here. Everybody tune in. It gets, I'm sure, shared and posted through social media, and it's a one-time, once-a-year big thing that like, okay, here's what your taxpayer dollars paid for in the last 365 days. It's what Dayton does. It's the same exact thing that like the city of Dayton,
A lot of communities do.
a lot of communities do like that.
I
Even
think
if it's
there'd
just
be
a
value in
report.
that.
I think there's value in it.
I agree.
And so, and it makes it easier for you. You just do it once a year, like I think too, so saves time from that.
Yeah, and Katie and I have talked about the potential format for sort of a state of a city process. And so part of my hesitation candidly has just been that until this year we only have, this will be our second year with the current budget book, right? So part of me has been hesitant to move too far, too fast without having more of the data in my hip pocket that I would want to be able to show. But we will keep that conversation rolling as the year goes on. I did have just a couple other things under other items that I wanted to touch on.
You always brief other items.
Always brief other items. So next meeting, February 3rd, I have asked Ms. Moore to come give a presentation about solid waste. So as most folks know, our contract is up with Republic. This is the last calendar year that we have under that contract. What I wanted to preview with all of you tonight that she will talk about a little bit more next week is there are changes in the local market from the last time we went out for trash service. So the city of Dayton is still in the game, but they're probably one of the, if not the only local city that would provide service. Our understanding is that they don't provide the same level of service as you can get contracted, meaning I believe, and I will correct this next week or at the next meeting if I'm incorrect, but I believe they are still operating trucks with crews of several folks who go out and do a lot of manual collection of trash cans. A lot of the newer contractors or newer model is to use the automated, lifters and everything else. The trend more and more increasingly in Hamilton County and in Montgomery County has been not unlike aggregation to try to get in with other cities and go out and try to buy the service on a larger aggregate level. We do have the opportunity to do that. We're off cycle for a lot of the Montgomery County communities, but we can partner with the Center for Local Government, which is based out of Hamilton County, but they have members up here, including Clayton, to get involved on their next basically solid waste bid solicitation. That would be the recommendation that I would suggest at this point, in part because if we try to write our own bid and go out by ourselves, we're a relatively tiny fish in a pretty broad pool. And our read of the market is that the number of competitors is actually going down. So we're actually seeing private haulers leave the market, which means it's less competition for us to go fish by ourselves with. If really we're talking about I am not sure how much longer Republic will be in our market. I don't want to, speculate shamelessly, but we have seen a trend of them either dropping clients or sort of reducing service in our area. I believe that was also true of Waste Management for a while. Rumpke is one of the bigger players who's left. So at this point, I don't want to get too far ahead of Ms. Moore, but I think our recommendation going into next meeting will likely be that we prepare materials to go out with CLG and some of the Hamilton County communities to at least try to get an aggregate. And as part of that process, we do have the option to customize some services within a certain range. But I'll have her on February 3rd give you a rundown on all that, and then based on your feedback, we'll take an approach as far as procuring trash service. And, oh, sorry, go ahead. I didn't know if there was a question, sorry.
I don't believe.
Okay, no, you're good.
Nope.
The only other item that I have is I'll also schedule some time, probably in February. I would like to talk a little bit about Budget Committee with everybody. We talked in, I believe it was December, was our last meeting. Since I've been here for 3 years, we've had 3, maybe 4 folks show up consistently to that committee. That is a committee by ordinance. And we had a little bit, so what that means is, the way the ordinance is structured, it's supposed to be composed of members from every voting precinct. Our ordinance is actually out of date, because shortly after we passed the ordinance, the county
Precincts
changed
changed.
precincts. All that is to say, we've never actually had a quorum in Budget Committee as long as I've been here. So I kind of went go fish as part of our conversation last time, which is where we sort of hashed this idea about maybe I do more of a quarterly update, and we look at what should the Budget Committee be? Should it be an ordinance committee? Should it just be open to everybody who wants to show up to one of my quarterly updates? How formal of a thing does it need to be? So again, not the most pressing issue for the city, but a little bit of housekeeping that I'll probably bring forward to you in February or March. Just something to think about as far as what the future of that committee might look like. I think now, if we were to try to get it fully staffed, I would need 34, because there are 17 precincts, and technically every precinct is supposed to have 2 members.
Yeah.
And when it's difficult to find anybody for planning and, or, BZA, I'm not going to tell you that I can get 34 people to be on Budget Committee.
Not just 34, you'd also you'd be restricted by geography in every case.
True.
So you'd have to find 2 people in each precinct
Right.
willing to serve.
So I don't want to belabor it this evening, but I did want to let you all know that conversation had happened, which is part of where the quarterly idea came from, and I'll tee it up for a discussion item here in the next couple months. So that's all I have.
Okay. It being the first time we're kind of running through this agenda item flow, we'll go through council member discussion, which is also what we would have maybe known earlier as council member comments. If you have nothing, that's fine. If there's a topic you'd like to bring up for a future meeting or for us to consider, or to maybe look for more information from city staff, this would be when we would typically do that at our meetings. So the floor is open. Does anyone have anything for council member discussion?
I guess I'd just button up the America 250 thing. Within 30 days of the passing, we need to designate 2 people from our city and a civic or cultural or corporate partner who'll be kind of our community organization to help us with this. Does anybody first off want to be a part of this? I mean, I would obviously be willing to be one of the members, but anyone else?
I'd be willing to do it. And I think I know a civic
And you might know a
organization.
civic organization.
So that's what I was thinking too, the JCs.
Well, I think it could be, I mean, depending on how we do it, we could start with the JCs, but I would like to see us kind of make a coalition of JCs, Lions, and any other organization that might, maybe even the VFW and American Legion, since it's the kind of the bicentennial
Yeah.
thing. So,
That is number 6 on here. It says, begin to form your AM 250 Ohio committee, involve all types of organizations, and begin the planning process.
yeah, well, when you said that, I
Yeah.
mean, that's just the way my brain works. I'm sorry, I apologize.
So, I mean, essentially, we'll have if we get selected and the grant is awarded, we'd have a pot of $5,000 to start with. Obviously, it's not limited, we'd be able to ask for donations, have further discussion about funding, but I think.
Well, the good part about using a local organization is most of them already have their 501c3, so
Right.
it'd be easy for them to get donations and stuff and get
Yeah.
started. So, and we could even, to me, in my brain, I'm thinking Student Senate, the Alumni Association, all the local organizations could get involved. I mean, it could really be something that we could make it happen. And the fact that 2026 would also be our 105th birthday of the city, we could tie it together. So,
Yeah.
I think that's, I mean,
It's a good
one
thing to
thing I've heard a
celebrate.
lot of is that, like, Huber does their fireworks, there's a lot of cities, Kettering, all of those, they have something that goes on.
well, we
There's lots of
we have
fireworks
the
here, right?
issue- We have the positive and negative of a certain
Yeah.
area that we can't, it'd be great to use, but I'm not sure we could.
Yeah, a concerned neighbor might have objections to that, maybe.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah,
That's also,
there's some things going on in my head.
We do have a professional in the city that I'm sure
Yeah.
would be more than happy, and we have been able to do fireworks over like in Walnut Grove,
mhm.
because it's far enough away, you know, so something could be worked out.
And I'd be curious too if like the Air Force, like being that we're, like, they live in our city, like would be willing to partner with us to help do something along
what?
those lines.
Bring back the tattoo?
Yeah.
I'll ask.
Tattoo, the fireworks and the celebration they used to do for 4th of July.
I can also ask that in
All right. Are there other council members that have any discussion items or announcements or comments?
Well, I did want to pick up on the topic that Sarah's brought up the past couple of meetings about the safe storage of guns. I wonder if we could put it on as a future discussion item to kind of give some finality to that, if that's something we want to pick up or choose not to pursue.
And at that time, I was going to
Can you put your microphone down?
have them open my mouth tonight. You guys are lucky. So I was going to bring that up, and you've been circulated some information from the manager. But in that discussion, I would like to request that the police chief or some representative of that organization participate in that discussion.
Okay, so to Brenda's point, is there a motion and a second to essentially add this as an agenda item that the city manager would be empowered to research, bring in other members of the city staff on, and essentially present to us in addition to what the work that he's already done, which was a good start, to essentially bring this forward as a future discussion item or a future agenda item. Am I saying it correctly? Future agenda item, basically?
And just to be clear, like, and so, thank you for bringing that up. I think in this instance, based on the information and research that we have done, the chief and Jim and I, and candidly, to me, I understand, I think where you're coming from as far as wanting to hear from somebody from the police department. I would want that to be a substantive conversation, which means I would need to task Chief Robinson with trying to pull together pictures, other items that help to illustrate. It's going to take time, like basically to explain why this isn't going to work. So I would ask for a motion to basically proceed, if you are interested in entertaining this as an item of conversation or to get to some additional context on. I would ask for a motion to do that.
Well, would it be more appropriate then to have the discussion right now as far as what the will of council is to take that next step?
I think that's fine. I mean, I guess the only downside is that the information that the managers share with us via email isn't in a council packet, isn't something that somebody who's maybe watching at home and sees a decision that we make wouldn't know some of that background.
Okay.
That's why, in my opinion, I have no problem bringing it forward as an agenda item that could then essentially become part of the record.
Okay.
And someone wouldn't have to make a public records request to figure out what did Josh email them.
Yeah.
Or what was emailed pertaining to the question that Sarah asked. So
I definitely think it's appropriate to do this as a motion with the news coverage and the discussion that we've had. It's a public thing that's known that that is something that this council has, or members of this council have asked to discuss. It's been discussed about in the community, so I think that it's, putting a motion right now to add that to a future meeting. Should we designate the date of that meeting, or just
I
like?
think that'll depend on how much time it's going to take the chief to get the information together.
I'll make a motion to put it on the agenda at the appropriate time deemed by the
City manager.
manager. Thank you.
That guy.
To,
All right.
to include a presentation
Yeah.
from the police.
Yeah,
We can
and
do
I
that.
think at the very least, the stuff that was shared with us about some
Yeah.
of the square footage and use of space.
Yep.
That's important for not only us, but for the community to know as we come to a decision. So
Yep.
we have a motion from Ms. Lomach. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. So we have a motion and a second to bring the discussion item forward on city storage of private,
Possible.
possible city storage of privately owned weapons, firearms in our city. Is there any further discussion? And this will be brought forward at a date deemed by the city manager. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, so that carries, and I think Josh knows what he's tasked with.
And I would say, I have been contacted by the media, several people in the media. I have not chosen to respond and don't intend to.
Okay.
All
So
right.
you guys will get contacted, I'm sure.
Well, we have been. We haven't responded either. Because it should be a discussion that we have.
Yes,
Right.
right.
I think. That's mine. Are there any other, well, I should say, other city council member discussion items as I look around?
Is this comments or?
It's the same as comments.
All right, well, I would like to thank and recommend to other council members. I had an amazing opportunity last Friday to ride the snow pusher with Brian. It was extremely educational, and until you get up in that truck and watch everything they have to be doing, monitoring the salt levels, and I mean, it's amazing. They were very quiet on the radio, and of course Brian said, that's because you're in the truck. So there wasn't a whole lot of give and take about where people were and what they were doing, but they normally, I guess, do that. And I would recommend opportunity for any of you to take. I did it, I had wanted to do it for some time, but I didn't want to do it at 10 or 11 or 12 o'clock at night because I wanted to be able to visualize actually and it worked out perfect because the snow started at 5 o'clock. So I rode for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and you learned a lot. And I want to thank them for that. And I do want to put a date on your calendars. I believe it's March the 9th, the Sunday night. It's a community prayer service from, help me out.
Hope for Riverside?
Thank you. Hope for Riverside.
And it's at
It's
Stebbins?
also the same day as daylight saving time starts. So it's a Sunday night. The location to be announced at this point, it's still under discussion. It's always been at the high school, but it's an auditorium that seats 2,500 people, and you get 200 people in there, and it looks like, oh, well, nobody came. So it's being discussed about where it will, but it will be that night, so.
Eintraub, upstairs.
What?
The Eintraub.
Oh,
Prayer service?
that would be a wonderful place to
prayer
have it,
service.
but people wouldn't get out there. They're trying to look for a more central place. They ask about, what does this room seat? Does anybody have a guesstimate?
There should be a note on the wall that it's not just a guesstimate. It's actually
I'll
a
look
pretty
when
strong
I go out,
recommendation from the
but
fire
I
marshal.
didn't think this was anywhere near, and so they're in research. It may still be at
Maybe
the high
60,
school. I
maybe
mean, they're not
70.
opposed to having it, but that's all I have, sir.
All right. Does anyone else have any council member discussion items or announcements or comments before the meeting is adjourned?
I have an announcement.
All right, Deputy Mayor?
The next blood drive is February 3rd. I got a note from the blood center that they're struggling with people being sick and not being able to show up for their appointments. So just want to put a call out. If you've never given blood before, now would be a great time. The demand is constant, even if people are homesick. So February 3rd, and I believe it's 3 to 6 in the front parking lot.
It's always very warm
Yeah.
inside.
And we will be having a meeting that night, so go give blood and then come join us for the meeting.
All right, thank you, Brenda. If there are no other council member announcements, comments, or discussion items, then I will adjourn the meeting at 7:41 PM.